Fallout 76. What is a role-playing game? It's probably not this. RPGs from the early 90s and 2000s largely followed the rule sets of pen and paper RPGs and feature stat blocks and automatic calculations. The systems in play are intended to add variety to the combat mechanics and some dialogue features. Bethesda RPG games have come from these roots, but have changed throughout the years to the behemoth franchise games we see today. Fallout 4, Elder Scrolls Skyrim, times 4. Bethesda has always taken their previous game and attempted to put a spin on it to represent a modern take on the same systems. Some edges get smoothed, some systems get simplified to improve the flow and make choices equally important. The repeated simplification of these stat blocks and combat systems are a testament to this philosophy. Another introduction that has changed the way Bethesda RPG games play has been the introduction of Radiant Questing. Radiant Questing is intended to add a dungeon crawling element to their games that is variable, adding more unique situations to an individual playthrough. No longer will a player who has played the game multiple times know exactly the next area he will need to travel to, what targets to eliminate, or items to collect. Instead, a random location is selected within a set of variables of enemy types and mission objectives. On paper, the idea sounds interesting, and is the evolution of the gameplay found in the older titles such as Daggerfall. In practice, the Radiant Questing mechanics feel like the filler arc in an anime series. They don't assist in building toward the overall narrative. Likewise, these are the only times where fail states are truly possible in the game. Kidnapping quests are the few times where NPCs flagged as essential are no longer essential and can be killed, resulting in changes to the game world that might be noticed but can often be overlooked. These changes in systems, mechanics, and quest handling left only one thing to do. By removing the last piece of the equation that was held over from their previous RPG games, the robust NPC dialogue interactions, we are given Fallout 76. At launch, Fallout 76 introduced players to a new map space to explore, with audio logs providing breadcrumbs of lore for players to engage with as random events start around them. The space, based on West Virginia of the Fallout series, is a look at America 22 years after the Great War, with nuclear bombs devastating areas all around. West Virginia before the bombs is supposedly a place where automation had largely taken over, resulting in a large workforce of robots and the necessary infrastructure to handle the manual labor jobs in the area. There is evidence of this in some of the areas visited in the game. In practice, however, the robots remain like static MMORPG NPCs, acting as vendors or quest givers. The few memorable robotic characters with personality are few and far between, and are introduced, then forgotten in the grand scheme of the overall story. Todd Howard justified the removal of human NPCs from the world as an exciting emergent gameplay mechanic. Other live human players provide the greatest randomness and interactivity possible. Why then was the main interactivity between players simply combat? Playing the game, it feels like a much more robust story was in place during development, but was then trimmed down significantly before resources were spent for recording and coding, as playtesting showed the multiplayer game they had resulted in was something similar to Rust. Players primarily scavenged for parts to build bases and stockpile weapons to fight one another. Introducing human NPCs would mean that players would need to identify the people they come across while playing. Additionally, more dialogue would be needed to introduce or allow players to interact with NPCs in a manner similar to previous Fallout games, beyond the simple accept a quest option. There's also the argument of trying to keep the players in the same world space, and the impossibility of doing so if every player has the power to affect the world space in significant ways regarding NPC interactions. The large number of world events is evidence of the focus on removal of normal quest interaction in favor of immediate action. All this probably changed as the game was revealed to the public at E3 2018, and questions regarding the game seemed to focus in on the overall story. And what a story it provides. All Bethesda's Fallout games end with a set-piece moment of a weapon of mass destruction being used. Fallout 3 had Liberty Prime walking along a street throwing nuclear bombs at Enclave soldiers. Fallout 4 had endings for multiple factions, all culminating in a detonation of a large nuclear explosion viewed from a skyrise vantage. The Institute was different, but whatever. Largely, the ending should be a big explosion. While Fallout 76 doesn't necessarily have an ending point as a persistent multiplayer game, the last big moment can be pinpointed to the launch of a nuclear missile at a designated target. The story quests of the game have you launch the missile at a corner of the map furthest from the spawn point for new players in the world to start an event where you defeat an endgame boss, a large dragon from Skyrim, with an inflated health pool and damage reduction table, while multiple random enemies spawn in the surroundings to harass your fight. What I described is the intended experience at the launch of the game, if everything was perfectly smooth and there were no issues and bugs. A game released in 2018? Of course there were bugs. There are tons of videos showing multiple different bugs during the early beta and launch that I and many other players played through. But some of my favorites include server instability, high frame rates allowing players to move faster simply by looking at the ground, enemies spawning at cell boundaries, in midair and frozen, animation bugs, and the ever-hilarious stretched-out human in an invisible power armor frame. Even after these bugs were largely fixed, and the servers became more stable, the core game was less than previous offerings and completely dependent on the experience had by interactions with other players. The fact that these bugs had a habit of getting reintroduced after being fixed with updates and content patches was not a great sign. You are a die-hard gamer. It's in your DNA. You decided to be a completionist and finished the content in the game. What is the real end game for persistent multiplayer? Duh. It's the loot. Legendary weapons, a mechanic carried over from Fallout 4, adds randomized effects to weapons, possibly greatly increasing their effectiveness. At launch, these weapons were dropped with complete random stats from legendary enemies who were intended to provide a greater challenge than the standard enemy. In practice, they are a piñata with a large health pool. Collecting these weapons became the real endgame, and a gray market developed, selling these weapons to players for real money. As with anything with a gray market, the chance for fraud and hackers to take advantage appears. Players found ways to access areas of the game intended for internal playtesting, replete with items that would not be available to normal players. Sales of these items on the gray market confounded Bethesda. Not into capitalist exploitation of your fellow gamer? The other endgame possibility and reason you want to play is to continue to expand your collection of junk. Show off your uniqueness by buying limited time items in the in-game currency shop. Participate in limited time events and show off your dedication to a loot table with a 0.2% drop chance for a rare blueprint of a rug or wall decoration. March 2019, 5 months after the release of the game. The first major content update that is not a stability or bug fixing patch is available. New workbenches are introduced, allowing players to create alcohol. A holiday event based on the real-world Fastnacht is first made available, along with some limited-time cosmetic items for participation. April released the second half of the update, allowing players to sell the items they collected to other players by creating vending machines at their bases, and introduced a new questline ending in a player-triggered world event titled Encrypted. May brought the release of another set of quests and events around the Pioneer Scouts, and brought backpacks into the game, wearable items intended to improve the carry weight of players. A new NPC vendor for legendary items allowed players to trade in unwanted legendary items for random legendary items. A new survival mode is added to the game, allowing players to be flagged as PvP active for increased experience and challenges to earn legendary items. August brought the short-lived Battle Royale game mode to the game. Another seasonal event, Meat Week, was introduced, bringing an hourly event for players to earn, you guessed it, limited-time cosmetic items. Display cases are introduced in the game to allow players to display items they have collected in their bases. This also introduces a fun new duplication bug, crashing the economy of the game. Raid missions are also introduced, allowing an organized team of 4 players to fight for rewards in a new interior space, Vault 94. November 2019 added the Fallout First subscription, letting players bypass the junk stash limits of their characters and place survival tents intended to be portable bases which allow access to a few crafting stations and stash that can be placed anywhere with a small footprint. A Halloween event is introduced, allowing players to earn limited-time cosmetic items and causes server instability and opportunity for players to grief each other without retribution. Christmas 2019 brings enemies dressed in festive holiday-appropriate clothing who drop presents for players to open, allowing players to earn limited-time cosmetic items. April 2020, Fallout 76 is released on Steam, and a new update, Wastelanders, adds new storyline quest content to the game, complete with the reintroduction of human NPCs to areas on the map. As a result, about 4 to 6 hours of solid story questing is added to the game for players to play through. Areas of the open world are heavily modified, and new random encounters are added to the world. The quest content is introduced in a way to help new players into the world as well. These new content quests are interspersed at different levels and in different areas to allow players playing through the game to encounter a slightly more streamlined questing experience, and drip feeds the newer, arguably better, content throughout. In terms of scale, it feels similar in scope and content to the Automatron DLC from Fallout 4. June 2020 adds the first season of content for the game. A trend in other persistent world games, seasons add in rewards for daily play, reworks daily and weekly challenges to reward progress in the season, and provides players the opportunity to learn limited-time cosmetic items. A quality of life improvement includes the ability to easily create public teams, allowing players to join each other to complete similar objectives. August saw the release of another player-activated quest event to fight a Wendigo Colossus in the Monongah Mine. September releases an update that rebalanced enemy levels and introduces scaling enemies to the game to provide a better experience for new and old players. The Daily Ops game mode is also introduced, a dungeon with randomized enemy types and special properties changing daily that replaces the removed raid dungeons from the game. November adds the Steel Dawn update, reintroducing the Brotherhood of Steel to the area, and is part 1 of a story questline involving the future leadership of this group. Additional NPCs are added. The Atlas Observatory is updated. A series of server-wide events are added in aiding this group's arrival prior to the patch, and new weapons and armor are added for players to find and build. Additional interactions with many of the current NPCs in the world are added to address the new faction in the game. April 2021 saw the inclusion of multiple base locations a player could have in the world and save. Special stat blocks could also be saved and changed at stations in the game, allowing multiple builds to be used on the same character. A minor expansion added a new game mode type to daily ops mission lists. September saw the removal of the Battle Royale game mode and replaced it with private worlds. In a private world, rule set modifiers allow players to adjust difficulty or creativity as they see fit. The most recent update to date, December 2021, added a new limited time event, the Mothman Equinox, which gives players a limited time to earn cosmetic items, and also the ability to loot within a global area from multiple corpses, and change the way legendary enemy drops are handled. Previously, legendary enemies had to be damaged by a player to receive loot. Now, a player only has to be in the vicinity to receive the same reward. What I described in these patches touch on the bare essentials of changes to the game, not including the multiple changes to the in-game store in an attempt to incentivize players to spend money. On top of the cosmetic items, some quality of life improvement items are also available for sale. In practice, these items are given freely through in-game events or as daily rewards for checking the shop in small quantity. Their bonus is also relatively minor, providing a greater benefit for lower level players and a minimal benefit for higher level players who aren't hoarding every item they find. Even some of the camp items, like the refrigerator, doesn't seem to provide much benefit and requires you to remember you placed items in the container to begin with. And the Collectron camp item provides passive junk collection, but often gives you items you don't need, and is available for free during certain holiday events with regularity. Ultimately, the game is much improved, but I'm not sure it's necessarily a better game. The game is still the same shoot the targets type of game. Only now, it has moments where you are reminded what a first-person RPG is, with the introduction of a character to tell you why you want to shoot those targets to begin with, and you're surrounded by long stretches of following a quest marker to a location where you come across a story being told through notes or holotapes, and you piece together details, only you're not sure if someone has already been through this area, leaving you with part of the picture.
We seem to be experiencing some technological differences.